Okay, my name's Rachel Eddy, and I chose to do Fragile X syndrome for my psychology project. Start with some history. In 1943, Martin and Bell discovered that a particular form of mental retardation was X-linked. They were discovering that in certain families there were many people in generations that were affected by a form of mental retardation, which led them to discover it was X-linked or genetic. In 1969, Herbert Lubbs discovered the chromosomal test for Fragile X syndrome, which was a cytogenic test. It wasn't widely used until the 1970s, and it really wasn't very accurate. In 1991, doctors Oostra, Nelson, and Warren identified the FMR1 gene as the cause of Fragile X syndrome. They named this mutation FRAXA, and this discovery led to DNA testing for a more accurate diagnosis of Fragile X syndrome. Fragile X syndrome is the #1 cause of inherited intellectual disability. It's often misdiagnosed, especially in people that were diagnosed in the late to mid-90s, because there was not a lot of information about it before then. It is more common in males than in females. It occurs in 1 in about 3,600 to 4,000 males and 1 in 4,000 to 6,000 females. A premutation, or being a carrier of Fragile X in the United States, occurs in 1 in 151 females and 1 in 468 males. So a female is much more likely to be a carrier and to pass it on to her children. Each child born to a woman with a woman who is a carrier for Fragile X has a 50% chance of being affected. And Fragile X syndrome causes a variety of behavioral and learning challenges. So, Fragile X syndrome is caused by a mutation of the X chromosome, which is the FMR1 gene. In the chromosome are trinucleotide repeats, and the one that Fragile X affects is the CCG repeat. A normal person has 6 to 20 repeats. A carrier, or someone with a premutation, has 55 to 200 repeats, and an affected individual has 200 or more repeats. The larger your number of repeats, the more affected. And as you can see in the picture here, Fragile X syndrome gets its name because the portion of the DNA, the portion of the X chromosome that's affected, is fragile at the end, and it's literally dangling off the end. Fragile X syndrome affects 5 general areas: intelligence and learning, physical characteristics, social and emotional, speech and language, and sensory. And there's just an example of different physical characteristics of someone who is affected. So I'm going to talk about language and communication. Language and communication delays in someone with Fragile X, it really depends on the person, and like I said before, the number of repeats that the first person has. Language delays can range anywhere from mild stuttering to severe delay, including inability to pronounce words clearly, the inability to speak or write clearly, and the inability to communicate in meaningful ways. Males and females who are affected have different troubles, different communication challenges, and unlike other forms of intellectual disability where the individuals are introverted and antisocial, Fragile X individuals are really interested in communication, but they're often, because of these delays, unable to hold a meaningful conversation. Males' challenges with language and communication include sensory overload versus a problem in the speech area of their brain. They're usually unaware of conversational cues, which causes them to do things like speak out of turn, fail to answer questions correctly, and turn away when they're unsure what to do, and they typically have poor eye contact. Language challenges with females typically stem from anxiety and shyness, And characteristics of a female with Fragile X syndrome would be things like mumbling, poor eye contact, disorganized, fast speech. They would tend to repeat themselves or restart a sentence or ask a question more than once. And they typically have difficulty controlling the pitch and tone of their voice. All of these things for males and females can be helped with speech therapy. There's a lot of, emotionally, there are a lot of social anxieties that a person with Fragile X faces. They have difficulty assimilating to new situations and meeting new people, establishing a new routine. The anxiety level can get so high, especially as the affected person gets older, that they can avoid social situations altogether. And in an affected person, their level of anxiety typically lasts longer. So things like a racing heart, sweaty palms, things like that last much longer in a Fragile X person, and so it takes them a lot longer to calm down from that. Fragile X individuals are often easily upset. This is more so in males than in females. Males tend to get upset and become aggressive, whereas females tend to have more mood swings, more emotional mood swings instead of aggressive type angry mood swings. Either way, the individual, once they're upset, can become rigid or tense. They can have whining and crying fits, even as adults. Things like tantrums, rocking back and forth and trying to bite themselves. And those behaviors typically worsen as the person gets into adolescence, as the hormone levels spike and fluctuate. There's currently no cure for Fragile X syndrome, and its symptoms are treated with behavioral, speech, and occupational therapies, and with various medications. Some of those include aggressive behavior would be treated with something like Lamictal, Depakote, or lithium. Anxiety would be treated with Valium or Xanax. Mood disorders would be treated with Abilify, Keppra, Klonopin. ADHD type behaviors would be treated with Ritalin or Adderall, and then they would use typically Prozac or Zoloft to treat depression. So I'd like to talk about why I chose to do Fragile X for my presentation. My sister is affected by Fragile X. It runs in my family. My mom is a carrier, and like I said, my sister's affected, so I've been around it my whole life. My sister was diagnosed in 1995, and they didn't have hardly any information about it at that time. And she was treated at Children's Hospital. She was evaluated at Children's Hospital, and she did years of speech and occupational therapy, and was in the special education program throughout her school years, and then into through high school, and then she did the transitions program at the college, which taught life skills and things like that. Yeah, so that's my project. Thank you.